joined once again by War Hamster Brady, and we are going to continue our series on Operation Gladio meets secret societies. How are you, Brady?
Doing wonderful. Finally got some summer weather, so getting a little happier. Wouldn't quite call it summer weather, but I can finally wear shorts.
Yeah, it's hard to fathom that you have to wait till June for that, but
that's from someone who spent most of their adult life in San Diego. It is a bit of a system shock, culture shock.
I went from Florida to Illinois. I'm familiar with that system shock.
Yeah. Shall we jump into it today?
Absolutely.
All right. For those who are new to the channel, we've been going through the secret societies, most specifically Skull and Bones, and we're up to the 1960s. And the question we were asking from the beginning is Skull and Bones just a normal fraternal organization where people network a little bit? Or is there something more sinister where they've created kind of a class above everyone else, where they have their fingers in all the halls and corridors of power, from finance to government to intelligence to the military? And I think we found so many of these overlapping connections happen over and over again. You can probably make the case that this new world order that they talk about is something they are very actively trying to put in place, and they've been quite successful at getting close to it. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
So we got some alumni from the 1960s, and most of these guys are still alive and kicking today. So they're participating in global affairs as we speak. So a lot of the names will be familiar. First couple, most people won't be too familiar with, and I'll go through them pretty quickly. I've got a bonesman, class of 1968, named Rex William Cowdery. I'm guessing nobody here is familiar with the name. He isn't that famous. It's not much known about his ancestry or his schooling. He came out of some place in the Midwest and was a good student. He'd go to Yale and get into psychiatry. And he became the director of the National Institute for Mental Health from 1994 to 96 under Bill Clinton. Those are the only thing he ever did that really put him on the radar. He's got one of the shortest wiki profiles you'll ever see. But what's significant about being the director of the NIMH in 1994? We'll talk about that real quick.
Yeah, let's.
Well, first of all, the director of the NIAID at the time was Dr. Fauci. So they knew each other. Those are two of the institutes there's 27 institutes that make up the whole National Institute of Health. It's a huge bureaucracy. The NIMH, National Institute for Mental Health, was founded in 1946 by Truman's National Mental Health Act. By 1955, 0.4% of U.S. population were in psychiatric hospitals. That's just about 560,000 patients. In 1954, they introduced chlorpromazine or thorazine and allowed many patients to manage their symptoms outside of institutions. It's when we started medicating our mental health away. Those side effects, did that ever have there been?
None at all.
63, Kennedy signed the Community Mental Health Act, and that gave federal funding for community health centers to replace the institutions. These huge institutions with all the white padded rooms, those were going away. In 1965, they passed a bill called the Medicaid IMD exclusion, and it barred federal funding if any facility had more than 16 beds. In 67, Governor Reagan in California signed the Lanterman-Petraeus Short Act that limited involuntary commitments and ended indefinite institutionalization. They had to let you go whether you'd gotten better or not. I mean, involuntary commitments, that's kind of a double-edged sword, because most crazy people probably don't want to be committed. So they do go in involuntarily. But do you really want the government, forcing us against our will when we haven't been convicted of a crime? All right, so the bureaucracy grows in the 60s by a series of acts. By 1977, Washington Post reports that the senior directors at NIMH were aware of the covert participation of the NIMH and MK Ultra. The NIMH was administering LSD to federal prisoners in Lexington, Kentucky. So that's where it touches on our Gladio theme and our CIA.
Yep.
So they start shutting down all these institutions. By 1994, there were over 250,000 former patients are now homeless and insane. 33% of the homeless population suffered from untreated mental illness. Jails became de facto mental health facilities, and 20% of prisoners had serious mental illness by 2005. It's an important topic. It's not, we haven't really jumped into it, but I mean, it's something that come up, and the fact that it ties back to the CIA is rather interesting. That this guy's a bonesman who's overseeing the institute right in '94 when the problem explodes into homelessness, and I think that you can kind of tie that to the fact that the CIA has always been involved in, shall we say, creating an artificial supply for drugs that have been trafficked in. And what better place to do that than homeless?
And also, this goes to the heart of the destabilization efforts of the CIA when they want to soften up a country in order to cause chaos.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's exactly what I'm suggesting.
I knew it.
Yeah. But, homelessness is a big problem, and mental health is a big problem. And I don't think anybody's addressing it yet, but I do find it interesting that it was a bonesman who oversaw that. All right. Next one's going to be fun. You ever heard of Don Scholander?
No.
Okay. Remember we talked about how these guys all these bonesmen went to these private boarding schools?
Uh-huh.
Well, Scholander didn't. He went to a public high school. Happens to be my alma mater. Yeah, let me share the screen here. Oops, where'd it go? Get back up there. This is Don Scholander. At the age of, I believe, 16, wearing around his neck are 4 1964 gold medals in swimming, the most gold medals anyone had ever won since Jesse Owens for the United States. Did that while he was living in Lake Oswego, Oregon, where I spent much of my childhood. He would then go on to Yale and become a bonesman after he'd won gold medals. And then he got done with his swimming and went back to Lake Oswego and owned a realty company. And he's done nothing else notable besides being involved in swimming, which is why I've actually met the guy about 24 times. When I was on the Lake Oswego swim team as a kid, he would come and help coach us every once in a while. So here's a bonesman that I actually know.
That's interesting.
Yeah, very small world type thing. All right. Now we're going to get into the juicy stuff. Stephen Schwarzman is our next bonesman.
How do you spell his last name?
Schwarzman.
Okay.
Let's take a look at Steve. Can you pull him up on screen? There's Stephen Schwarzman. Oh, where's he talking at? Speaking at the World Economic Forum. Interesting. Wonder if it's going to tie into any of our globalist themes. Okay. He is a bonesman class of 1969. He is known as the chairman and CEO of the Blackstone Group.
Oh, yeah, that doesn't tie into anything.
No. We're going to go through that lot of the Blackstone Group today, so that's going to be our big theme. And, of course, it'll trickle into Blackrock. He was also the chairman of Donald Trump's Strategic and Policy Forum. Forbes lists his net worth at $43 billion. Guy's raised in Huntington Valley, Pennsylvania. Went to public school. His father was a dry goods store owner and a graduate of Wharton School of Business, University of Pennsylvania. Goes to Yale and joins Skull and Bones. Briefly in the Army Reserves right after graduating. Then he goes to Harvard Business School in 1972. So he's got his connections now, right?
Right. That's the recruiting field.
Mm-hmm. So his first job is with a firm we've talked about quite a bit called Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jenrette, DLJ. As a reminder, that's founded by Donaldson, who is a bonesman. And they also had another banker there by the name of James Buckley, also a bonesman and brother of the more famous Buckley. So that's who he's working with or for. He does that for a while, and then he becomes the managing director at Lehman Brothers at the age of 31.
Well, and DLJ merges with Credit Suisse. Suisse.
Yeah.
And that organization was very involved in a lot of the Nazi movement of money as well. It had a reputation of money laundering.
Oh yeah, and of course Lehman Brothers would be probably one of the main triggers of the financial crisis, the crash of 2008.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about Lehman Brothers before because one of their other notable bankers was a Charles Spofford, who was a Skull and Bones alumni. He was also a Davis Polk law client. And remember, Davis Polk law firm has been all over these deep state things. They had DLJ would also merge with Kuhn Loeb, and we've talked about Kuhn Loeb before.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, Lehman's the company that made the deal with Rockefeller to form Chase Manhattan Bank, and then of course.
So what we're describing here, these mergers are happening as they become to get them into the category of too big to fail.
Yeah, and we have the same set of characters being involved with all that. The last thing I have, the other last Lehman connection we've had before was Robert Lehman was one of the Hotchkiss School alumni we talked about just a week or two ago.
Right.
That's from his grandfather was the founder of Lehman Brothers. And
I along this, how you bring the past into the present when you mention the financial crisis in 2008. If you haven't watched the show I did with Alpha last night, one of the other major players was AIG, and AIG traces its roots back to C.V. Starr, who was part of the OSS CIA nexus in China before moving their headquarters to New York. And they just so happened when they moved their headquarters to New York during World War II was in the same office with the OSS element in New York, just to close that loop. And they were, too big to fail and got $163 billion in the 2008 crash.
We're going to be mentioning AIG again today.
Well, we talked at length about it last night.
Yeah, I saw that on X. We won't go into as much detail, but they are a player in this story, obviously.
Yeah.
All right. So our buddy, Mr. Schwarzman, then becomes the global head of mergers and acquisitions for Lehman Brothers. Or is he? Yeah. He's at Lehman now. Then in 1985, his boss, this guy by the name of Peter G. Peterson, and they decide to go out and start what's known now as the Blackstone Group. So we're in 1985. I think we need to take a look at Mr. Peterson. He might look familiar to you. Not a household name, though, right?
Right.
Should be.
It's always the ones you don't know that are worrisome.
Well, you're going to know him before today's over. We're diving into him. He's the business partner, Mr. Schwarzman. And I guess Schwartz means stone, and Pete means the rock, for like Peter from the Bible. So that's how they came up with the name Blackstone. All right. They love their plays on words.
Yes, they do.
So let's talk about Blackstone. Oh, let's talk about Pete Peterson first. What's he been doing? Well, 1972 and 73, he was the U.S. Secretary of Commerce under Nixon. So he's been around. He was born in Nebraska in 1926. His parents were immigrants from Greece. They were the Petropolis, and they anglicized their name to Peterson. Peterson was an entrepreneur at a very young age. His father ran a Greek diner, and he started working the cash register when he was 8 years old. Smart kid, gets into MIT and gets kicked out as a freshman for plagiarizing. Did I stop my screen share already? Good.
Yeah.
Okay. So leaves MIT, enrolls in Northwestern, and graduated with honors. Goes off to the University of Chicago and gets his MBA in 1951. So not an Ivy Leaguer. Funny coincidence about Peterson, his second wife and widow is a woman by the name of Joan Gans Cooney, better known as the co-creator of Sesame Street.
And him going and getting his MBA at Chicago would have placed him with what would go on to be known as the Chicago Boys that went down and exploited the markets in Chile.
Mm-hmm. There's also the Chicago School of Economics. We'd be tied in with those guys. A lot of them are central bankers.
Yes.
We run into them a lot when we're dealing with that stuff. Okay. So after his MBA, he works from 1958 to 71 for a movie equipment maker called Bell and Howell Corporation. And then his life takes a big, serious turn. In 1969, he's invited by none other than former Secretary of the Treasury, Douglas Dillon, current Council of Foreign Relations Chair, John J. McCloy, and John D. Rockefeller III to chair a commission on foundations and private philanthropy. That is interesting that three people that prominent, it really hasn't done much so far. This became known as the Peterson Commission. We're not going to go totally into that, but when we get into foundations, we'll circle back to that. What it was really recommending is that foundations annually disperse a minimum of funds every year. He told me that foundations weren't dispersing funds previously, and they were just hiding their generational wealth inside their tax-free foundations while the rest of us fund all of their NGOs and government organizations. Yeah. So when he was the Secretary of Commerce, he produced a secret report for Nixon that led directly to ending the Bretton Woods Agreement and taking the U.S. off the gold standard. That's the guy who would later go on to co-found Blackstone with our bonesman, Stephen Schwarzman.
That's pretty huge.
The top economist at the time, and these are direct quotes, they derided his thesis as a form of mercantilism that betrayed economic illiteracy. Mercantilism, you've heard me talk about it ad nauseum, is just another word for fascism. And basically, this guy was recommending that Nixon take us on the gold standard. And the result, what happened was it strengthened central banks and money printing. And we see what we have today. We were run by corporations. This guy was one of the triggers that made that happen.
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm. So in 73, right after he's working with Nixon, he becomes the chairman of Lehman Brothers. Then he co-founds Blackstone in 1985 and would go on to make about $1.9 billion on the Blackstone IPO in 2007. I think we should get into Blackstone. I'll get back to Peterson after. I want to talk about Blackstone now and Blackrock.
Okay.
All right. Someone astutely already put in the chat, and I've been correcting people on for quite some time on X. Blackstone and Blackrock are not the same entity, but they are related. People always think Blackrock's buying up all the property. No, that's Blackstone. They're the real estate one. It's founded in 1985 as a mergers and acquisitions advisory boutique. Started with $200,000 from each of the co-founders. Then they go out and had a bigger raise. They're just doing small little deals, trying to be an advisory firm. But then they decided, they raised a bunch of capital. And it just so happens it was right before the crash of 1987. And I bring this up because Peterson is famous, and Schwarzman said it too. Their stated strategies to take advantage of market downturns. And Blackstone says, what Peterson said is, you move in opportunistically and make investments in distressed industries. Sounds smart, right?
Well, it sounds exactly what like the CIA does around the world. They create the destabilization, which you just described they're going to be doing with all of the, releasing of psychiatric patients. And then they take advantage and in many cases know ahead of time, like in the Soros case of the currency manipulator. And then they, via the mercantilism model, you go in and you scarf up all of the distressed assets at bargain basement prices. And so people have to understand that they create the financial crisis so they can gain from the financial crisis.
Bingo. You picked up exactly what I'm hinting at. And see, if you know about it ahead of time or if you cause it, it's real easy to make money.
Yes.
So they started really getting on the map in 1988 when they advised CBS on the sale of CBS Records to Sony. I think we all remember that.
Yeah.
Then they go out there and raise $800 million for their first private equity fund. And the big donors there were Prudential and General Motors. So now they go from...
Hold on a second. Prudential, the insurance?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And keep in mind, based on last night's show, AIG was the insurance. And they use that money as like a big billy club to be able to do all of these things with your money, but they profit from it. Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah. And a lot of things. Insurance companies also have to have stable assets. So these guys are branching off into real estate, and they're going to do a private equity fund, and that's how they got the money from Prudential. They're buying not just real estate, but they also, in their first private equity fund, they're also doing debt financing, which is like distressed debt. Buy companies that are hurting, you buy their debt, you end up getting control of the company, and you spin off their assets. That's what these guys are doing, and they're getting a lot of money to do it. Private equity, I've talked about it a little bit here, but I'll just touch on it. It is a great way to invest if you are an accredited investor and have a whole lot of money, because the public does not get access to these deals. Private equity can do a lot of things that public equity cannot. And I think a lot of the smartest investments right now is in private equity. There's just better deals out there. Once you go public, pretty much you've got to reveal everything there is to know about the company. Private equity, you can get in early before everything goes public.
And private equity is also a favorite of people that are trying to hide money to take over entire industries.
It's been used for a few malicious purposes over the years. In general, I'm a big fan of private equity. I just know it's been used poorly.
Yeah.
So they've got this thing. They've got a thing that always rather buy something than build it. That concludes when it comes to real estate or companies or you name it. They'll buy something else, find a way to monetize the cash flows or sell off the assets. That's what these guys do. They are vultures. So we're getting up to the 2000s. And Blackstone, we get to the great financial crisis. 2007, 8, 9, Blackstone starts buying up foreclosed properties. During COVID, when real estate was depressed, Blackstone swoops in. When the eviction moratorium expired, they started kicking out tenants. They love inflation because it allows them to jack up rents. Nice guys, huh?
Yeah.
So now we've got, right now, today, they've got $1.2 trillion under management.
And isn't this the group that was that had bought up all of those houses that then were renting them to illegals and getting reimbursed by the government under the Biden administration?
Yeah. Did you see me earlier when I told you that Schwarzman was on one of Trump's most important committees?
I did.
Uh-huh. Keep that thought in your head as we go through this today. Let's see. Oh, that 1.2 trillion, $350 billion in real estate that they have under management. They're the largest commercial real estate owner in the world. The Blackstone REIT, Real Estate Investment Trust, has got about 130 billion of that. The next biggest REIT in the world is 23 billion, 5 times smaller. REITs have a lot of advantages. Most specifically, they get tax advantages because they have to distribute 90% of their income as dividends, but that avoids income tax, the corporate income tax rate. They don't have to pay it. And they also get to depreciate their assets. And Blackstone's been criticized by competitors for how it values its assets and carries it on its books. You know, these guys are playing really in the gray area of finance laws, but they have a big advantage. And they've lobbied Congress for decades to get these tax advantages and not be considered a corporation.
And that's exactly what the U.S. corporations doing business in foreign governments, in foreign countries would do. Like in every country where United Fruit or ITT, they would undervalue the company in that location to pay little taxes in that foreign country. And then when the foreign country tried to nationalize it, they would inflate it and say, that's what you owe me. Not the balance that they had been paying taxes on for the last 20 years. So this seems to be a reoccurring theme in how these guys do business. And it's being done in the United States. While we focus on foreign countries, it's being done to us too.
Very much so. All right, the rest of their AUM, assets under management, they got about $300 billion in their portfolio in credit and insurance. What does that mean in credit? Well, that's shadow banking. That's lending to the unlendable. That is a very shady, but very profitable business.
You mean like people who do things like drug sales and stuff like that?
No, it's less the criminal than the debanked. Certain high risk entities can't, the bank can't lend to them. The standards are too high. The shadow banking industry serves that part of the population, but you're going to see some criminal activity, but most of it's just bad credit people and high credit risks.
So that's what they were doing in Bangladesh to destabilize Bangladesh. What they called it micro banking there.
Yeah, it's a big issue. I think we talked about with the remittances going across the southern border. That business is shady as all heck. You get a payday lender, same darn thing. Payday lending is a big part of shadow banking.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, for those who don't know, if you've got 5 days to go before your paycheck and you need money in it today, you walk down to one of these shady places. You can get a payroll loan, show them the last couple pay stubs, and they'll lend you like your entire upcoming paycheck or minus about 30%. And that's 30% for 5 days interest. It's a very profitable business. You sign over your paycheck before it gets there, so they always collect.
Yeah, and that's what they were doing in Bangladesh using USAID. The USAID was supporting these companies, and they were funneling money into these help programs. So they would do the micro banking knowing that that's going to be the source of the repayment. So plus the 30%. If you didn't pay, in some cases in Bangladesh, it went up to 100%. but they knew they were going to get the money because they were funneling it through our taxes through USAID into fund these programs.
Yeah, it just reminds me of the time when Biden said you're not going to get the $1 billion. Well, that was a loan guarantee from USAID.
Yes.
All right, going back to Blackstone. They've got another about $100 billion, and this is one to watch because it's going to grow. They've had $100 billion of investments in what we call infrastructure. Infrastructure, roads, highways, bridges, ports, that's infrastructure. They've been talking about taking over all these utilities type stuff for a long time. China's been doing it. These major corporations do it. Infrastructure is the next big thing. And if you all want to go back on the channel, one of the earlier shows that the Colonel I did, on my channel, it's called, it's on the Shadow State series. It was the corporate side of Gladio. We started talking about these natural asset NACs, natural asset companies. Yeah, they're trying to buy up all the infrastructure, be it water or anything like that. I will try to put that link on my channel so you guys can go back and watch it. But you're going to want it. We went into a lot of depth over how that works with the infrastructure banks.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and tell them how that ties into Gladio, because I think that's a big point to make. When you look at the big Gladio operation, it all starts with the banks go in there first, and then they start doing these investor state dispute settlements, and they get their corporate leverage over the company. When a country decides they want the resources for themselves, well, that's when we come in with Gladio and overturn.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's what infrastructure and spending is all about. All right, so Blackstone goes public in 2007 with a $4.13 billion IPO. They also sold 3 million non-voting shares to the China Investment Corporation. So these people that are evicting everyone like that, well, China's profiting from it too. That puts the total.
Our mortal enemy. Our mortal enemy.
According to some.
Yeah.
The company was valued. That put the company valuation of $33 billion. Now the market cap is now $105 billion. It's a huge company. Once again, they are not taxed as a regular corporation. They got carve-outs. They lobby Congress constantly. They're a huge Republican donor. In their annual report, it even states that a Democrat admin is bad for Blackstone. The reason for that is the Elizabeth Warrens and Bernie Sanders of the world have always been over Blackstone of getting their favorable tax treatment. They hate that. They've been attacked the whole time, and that's why these Blackstone guys are Republican donors. It's simply over that tax carve-out they have. But they work with Democrats just as much, because if you go back and read the John Podesta emails that got leaked in 2015-16, you'll see Blackstone's name all over those emails. And Blackstone has made political donations to Obama, Clinton. The big one was Marco Rubio. Yeah, they loved Rubio. The China hawk.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so that's Blackstone for you. Coming out of Blackstone was a company called Blackrock. It was founded in Blackrock's founded in 1988 as a proposal by Larry Fink. He goes to Peterson and Schwarzman and says, "I got this great idea." But let's talk about Larry Fink real quick.
Okay.
Larry Fink's current net worth is about $1.2 billion. He also sits on the board, of course, of the World Economic Forum. I got a picture of Larry Fink for you.
Okay.
Give me 1 second. And here's Larry. Yeah, who's that guy next to him? It's a good question, huh?
Yeah.
Does it bother you that Trump has people like this in his ear, like Schwarzman and Fink?
It doesn't me, but I know there's a bigger picture here, because again, it goes to that adage about when you have these people close to you, it makes it easier to track their networks.
Yeah, in Donald Trump's position, he has to talk to the world leaders. These are some of the most influential people in the world. He's got to talk to them. You don't do guilt by association, but it does bother me, some of the people that are in his ear. Because when Trump says...
But understand that he seems to be the kind of person that brings them to his ear, lets them tell him what they want him to do, and then he goes off and does basically the opposite of what it is. You know what I mean? So it is advantageous to keep them close to him. Because in many cases, he doesn't even actually have to do it. He can pre-position the information around them to orchestrate a groundswell against whatever it is they wanted him to do. And he can just look and shrug his shoulders and go, they don't want me to do that, so I'm going to have to do this other thing over here. He's a master at doing things like that. We watch him do it in foreign affairs all the time, and people don't believe that he takes that same position here in the United States.
Yeah, at the same time, a lot of his policies that he's pushed and gotten through have benefited big business. And that's what he is. He is a big business, big government Republican. He's not this limited government constitutionalist that I would prefer down the road. I love the fact that he's there right now because he's probably the best bulwark against the real enemies. But to think that he's going to take down this entire system, that's not what he's trying to do. He's trying to remake it as a more benign version of the same beast without a lot of the criminals.
Okay, but I'm going to push back just a little bit. You have to be able to have business in the United States if we're ever going to be able to cut the strings of who's controlling us from outside too.
100%.
Yeah.
Trump wants the Americans to prosper economically, and he's fine if the rest of the world does too. That's why he's not the predator. He wants peace. He wants trade. He wants everyone making money.
Yes.
And that includes big business. Unfortunately, a lot of the big businesses are the predatory ones, and they benefit from Trump's policies.
Yep.
All right, more on Larry Fink. Where's he come from? Do you know where he's from?
I don't.
He is a California boy. Went to UCLA and UCLA MBA, business school. So he was a California guy. He was not connected. But he's a hustler, and he's smart. And he goes and works for a asset manager called First Boston in 1976. Oh, you know First Boston?
I do.
Why do you know First Boston?
Because of United Fruit.
Well, you'd be pleased to know that they are no longer with us. But what Fink does at First Boston, and is he basically helps create the very first mortgage-backed security, which is interesting. Okay, so let's see. What do we got?
Explain that real quick to everybody what that is. I think there's probably some people who don't know what it is.
Computers are first coming out in the 80s. And you finally had a computer on your desk if you're a broker or a trader or what have you. And he's the guy that figures out that now we have computers, we can actually track the cash flows of all these mortgages. If we can do that, we can break them up in different tranches. And we can have A-rated paper down to C-rated paper. But if we put them all together, the odds of all of them defaulting aren't as bad. So we can give them an A rating. And of course, the credit agencies, Moody's and Credit Suisse, join hand. And voila, you just invented the subprime mortgage and basically are the father of the great financial crisis where Blackstone came in and swooped up all the property.
Thank you, because I knew you could circle that.
Yeah. Oh, God. That's Larry Fink.
Yeah.
Before we get into the Blackrock history, just for all the talk you hear of sitting from his perch as CEO of Blackrock, he puts out world's largest asset manager. He puts out an annual letter, a company report, I forget what he calls it, and he usually uses it to lecture CEOs of other companies and people around the world on how they should be acting. And most of the time, he's lecturing us on climate responsibility. He's a huge believer in the climate hoax and one of the biggest funders of it. we'll get into the ESG investing. That's where he pushes that stuff. But at the same time, he's also considered, The Guardian, mind you, lists him almost every year as one of the biggest climate villains. They say he profits from deforestation. And he also made a $15 billion deal with Saudi Aramco to put together a project to pipe their natural gas in, which is obviously not green friendly. So he's profiting off fossil fuels while lecturing the rest of us.
So that's why I want to push back. He's not a big believer in it. He's a big promoter of it, because it's different than when you believe in something than when you promote it so you can get rich off of fake news.
Yeah, he's a big believer in the Great Reset, that's for sure.
Yes.
Which is actually the whole point of the whole climate scam, is the Great Reset. So, all right.
Correct.
So we can tie that to put that one to bed.
Yes.
All right, so we get to 1994. BlackRock then splits off from Blackstone altogether. It it's funny, Blackstone sold its interest for only $240 million. It's a deal that Schwarzman has always regretted. And this is 1994. BlackRock is now its own entity. And it had grown by 1992 to about 17 billion in assets under management. And then 2 years later, it had gone 10 times bigger to $170 billion under management. And that's impressive growth.
And was that private? So we don't know where that money came from?
That's the assets under management is the money they are basically managing assets, whether it be mostly stocks, companies, stuff like that, and some real estate. Okay.
But do we know what it's made up of?
You'd have high net worth investors and institutions would give BlackRock their money to manage.
And what I'm suggesting is, if you had some of that Citibank gold that they had that didn't actually belong to them from places like, I don't know, Golden Lily, would they be able to move it into this during that time to include it under the assets managed? Because it's sitting in a now nameless bank account on Citibank, and they can't do anything with it because it's not theirs.
So remember what I talked about? I guess we haven't talked about it too much. What you're going to see here is really good example of how, if you have the connections at Wall Street, you just need to have a decent idea. They'll find a way to finance it and then send their army of brokers to sell it to the public. You've got access to almost unlimited capital if you have that kind of access. So we get to 1999, and BlackRock does this. It goes public. Now, at the time, I'm a licensed financial advisor working for major Wall Street banks. We knew who BlackRock was, but they were like a second-tier player. I had these guys, very, very highly talented gals and girls, sharply dressed, well-trained, come into your office trying to get you to use their mutual funds or ETFs or insurance products on your clients. That's what these guys do for a living. The BlackRock guy had a really tough time getting in the door with us because we're all busy. This is 1999. This is when BlackRock goes public, and they sold 25% of the company to the public for $840 million, and that means the company was valued at $3.2 billion. Now that they've got access to Wall Street capital, they go out in they start buying up other asset managers. Remember the whole thing about buy versus build? Mm-hmm. I think didn't build much, I should say. They bought State Street Asset Management because the exchange traded funds were coming in. It's a cheaper version of mutual funds. And that was coming. Vanguard was the first one to get the ETF out there, where State Street was there too. ETFs obviously have become a dominant part of the investment market because they're cheaper. And basically, index funds are blind, deaf, and dumb, but most active managers who charge more can't beat the index on a regular basis. Some can. Hedge funds do. Private equity managers do. But most of the mutual funds that we have access to, the retail people have access to, don't beat the index. So you're much better off with an index fund or an ETF, which is blind, deaf, and dumb, and has a much lower internal expense ratio. And you end up, after expenses, with a better return. And that's why ETFs exploded BlackRock saw it early, and they're one of the biggest players there. That's why they became, well, we'll get there. They also merged with Merrill Lynch's investment managers, part of the Merrill Lynch business. And that doubled BlackRock's assets under management. That was 2006. And in 2007, they bought a company called Quellos, which is a Seattle-based hedge fund manager. And hedge funds are great for high net worth investors. You can do things like go long or short. You can do all kinds of things you can't do in a traditional investment vehicle. Again, the accredited investor, the high net worth, is allowed to do things that nobody else can. And here's why this really ticks me off. They put the accredited investor rule in place, I think in 1973. I could be off by a few years there. And they said basically to invest in certain vehicles, you have to have a net worth, an investable net worth of $1 million. Okay, seems reasonable because they don't want people who don't have. They figure you got the financial wherewithal to take chances or go into illiquid products that the average person can't. They're trying to protect the consumer, or are they? You want to know what the accredited investor?
Save it for them.
Yeah. You want to know what the accredited investor limit is today?
What?
Still $1 million. They have not once inflation adjusted it. Everything else goes up in price, but this one they've kept lowering it. I mean, it stayed the same. So that's how serious I think the SEC is about the accredited investor rule. All right. So we've got Mr. Larry Fink, who, of course, invented the credit default swap, which was one of the founders of the credit default swap. There's a couple other people that did that as well. I shouldn't say the credit default swap. I meant the collateralized mortgage obligation. Credit default swap's different. In 2006, BlackRock does a real estate investment in something called Stuyvesant Town in the Peter Cooper Village. It's a $5.4 billion deal, and it's the largest real estate deal in history at the time. Of course, this defaulted. All the BlackRock clients lost money, including CalPERS, to the tune of $500 million. The California pension plan, lost $500 million thanks to BlackRock. So that's two major checks on Larry Fink's record of having bad judgment. In 2007, they still get their assets under management up to $1 trillion. At this point in time, I think I'm working for Smith Barney, or Citigroup Smith Barney. The great financial crisis hits, and Lehman Brothers collapses. You know how we have all these connections to Lehman Brothers with these guys?
Uh-huh.
Think they knew Lehman was going to collapse?
Yes,
well,
I
do. BlackRock starts showing up everywhere. They became a household name overnight during the great financial crisis. BlackRock becomes the advisor for AIG, Lehman Brothers, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac. They all hired BlackRock to help sort out their collateralized mortgage obligation portfolios, these things that have just become toxic waste. We figure the guy who invented it's going to know how to do it. So that's how BlackRock gets the gig. And they took on a lot of the distressed debt and ended up making money on it, the good stuff.
So they created the crisis and benefited from it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The U.S. government calls it BlackRock. Former Goldman Sachs alumni Tim Geithner, the Treasury Secretary, consulted with Larry Fink 49 times in the next 18 months. And the Fed had BlackRock help finance the bailouts of AIG, Citibank, and a couple others.
And I have that figure. The Fed ended up with $38 billion to AIG.
Yeah. Basically, it was a great financial crisis that made BlackRock the top of the heap. They went from being a second-rate asset manager to number one because of a great financial crisis and being able to swoop in.
That they created the mechanism to make happen.
Sure. At the same time, Blackstone's buying up all the real estate on the cheap.
So it's almost like they were, there's a dotted line as opposed to a solid line.
Well, I'm sure they're still talking. They're still in contact.
Yeah.
And at the heart of this, of course, is one of the founders of Blackstone is a bonesman who's got all
And
his.
let's just pretend that they're two separate organizations.
Mm-hmm. All right. So then BlackRock. Well, how do you stay at the top of the heap? You get political. There's people who call it BlackRock now the de facto fourth branch of government. They've got their ESG investment, environment, social, governmental. This is where BlackRock comes up with a rating on companies and says, well, are you being environmentally friendly? Are you following this green agenda? Because if you get a good score, you can raise money from Wall Street. If you get a bad score, you can't. If you get a good score, you can get more contracts. You get a bad score, you can't. They are basically able to leverage their size and this ESG score and force corporations to toe the line. They're also able to force their own people on boards of directors.
So let me put this in layman terms. They created a crisis. They used it to accumulate massive wealth. And then they create a system called ESG to manipulate everybody that isn't them in order to funnel government green initiative money into their coffers.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then they're leveraging their size because, quote unquote, BlackRock owns all the share. They're the majority shareholder, BlackRock and Vanguard, of just about every publicly traded company. We'll get to that in a second because that's only partially true. But they put their own people in the boards of directors, and that's how you get all this woke DEI stuff in corporate America. This is what BlackRock did.
So they have actually orchestrated a fascist system under the guise of capitalism.
Under the guise of green capitalism.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Now the ESG stuff, we got some pushback on it. This is a big success story. We had over 19 state attorney generals have sent letters to Fink about this stuff. We've had states like Louisiana, South Carolina, and Arkansas say, if you are doing this ESG investing, BlackRock funds, you're out of our state pension funds. And that's a lot of money.
Florida did it too.
Yeah, Florida's on that list too. So we're winning the ESG battle to some degree. So they're actually closing their ESG funds, which is great. Plus, they weren't making any money. If anybody's been in the markets for more than 20 years, you remember the first socially responsible mutual funds. They all had negative track records. I wouldn't touch those with a 10-foot pole. I'd have a client would come in. I'd like to invest socially responsible. I go, I've got a fiduciary responsibility for you not to lose money.
So I don't think it was ever to make money, as far as I'm concerned. It was control.
So ESG, BlackRock is now backed off on all their ESG push as of about 2 years ago.
Because they got caught.
Yeah, we caught them at it. But don't think ESG's gone away. It'll be back and they'll relabel it. They still have their people on the boards of directors.
Correct. Yeah, this was just a big wealth transfer via the you know what I mean? That's what it was.
Yes. Someone mentioned the carbon tax in chat. Yeah, that's about a $6 trillion market they're trying to create out of thin air. All right, so let's talk about the myth of BlackRock owns all of every company. The answer is yes or no. If you go to any publicly traded company on Yahoo Finance, you look up their top 10 institutional holders, the top 2 or 3 on almost all of them are going to be BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. And that's because these are the 3 biggest ETF managers, and the ETF business is bigger than the mutual fund business now. But do they actually own those shares? Colonel, if you came and sat at my desk and bought $1,000 worth of XYZ stock, when you open the account, you're going to make a box says, I want to vote my own proxy shares, or I'll have the firm, whoever I work for, vote on your behalf. You're given the option of whether you get to vote for it. Because one of the benefits of owning stock is you get a say in how it's managed.
Right.
Even if you're a small little shareholder, you get a vote. With these fund companies, they have lobbied the regulators to make it so they get to vote the proxies by default. You don't get the option. The arguments they use to make that happen is that the Investment Advisory Act of 1940 made asset managers, gave them a fiduciary responsibility. And it's their responsibility to vote on your behalf to make sure you don't make a bad vote. They also say the scale and they've always said the scale and logistics of every individual shareholder who owns, if you own 2% of Microsoft in my mutual fund, I got to send you the proxy for Microsoft's board. They say the scale and logistics is impossible. It's 2025. We can deal with it with computers. We absolutely need to put a stop to this. They are voting. They are acting as if they own shares, which they are not the beneficial owner of.
Correct.
They have assumed the American investing public's right to have a say in our publicly traded companies. And by doing that, they have put their own people on the boards of directors. That's why you get DEI. That's why you get woke policies. And that is all coming from the Blackrocks of the world. They are absolute villains.
Agreed.
All right. So there's some pushback on this. Vivek Ramaswamy's Strive Asset Management has been pushing for what's called shareholder empowerment. And that's something to follow very closely. Vivek's on the right side of this one. Elizabeth Warren has pushed back on this thing because she's basically anti-big corporation, apparently. Ted Cruz has started legislation to impact this, but this is something that we need more state attorney generals to get involved in. And there's a particular attorney general in Alaska who I am trying to get in touch with because he has said some of the best things regarding this. We could basically strip BlackRock of all its political power overnight. And it's a legislative thing. And our Congress knows about this and needs to do it. Fair enough?
I think that's fair, but I also think that the states have the power to do it as well.
Well, that's interesting because the SEC actually is the governing body. That is federal. That's one of the things where I think the supremacy clause, BlackRock could fight back against the state, but the states in general could cause a class action.
Yes.
And we as shareholders could do a class action and say our voting rights have been stripped of us and we want them back.
Right.
It can be done. It's a congressional fix at the end of the day is the best way to do it. And I think it's something that Republicans and Democrats could get behind if so many of them weren't bought and sold. If the voters could determine this would be gone. But did I get all the myths on BlackRock I wanted to do? Yeah.
I think you got them all.
All right. So let's go back to Mr. Peterson.
But the takeaway for everybody is Blackstone and BlackRock are not the same.
Nope, but they sure know each other.
Yes.
Yeah. But Blackstone's the one that owns the real estate. BlackRock is the asset manager that does all the stocks and bonds. That's the fund company. That's the big difference. My 30,000 foot view. All right, let's go back to 1985. They're Peterson and Schwarzman are co-founding Blackstone in 1985. What else happens to Mr. Peterson in 1985? Well, he becomes the successor to David Rockefeller as the chairman of the Council of Frickin' Foreign Relations, where he would sit for the next 22 years as the chair while he's managing Blackstone.
Holy crap.
Yeah, you got a conflict of interest there at all?
Tad, a little bit.
Yeah. Thinking he gets any inside information?
On everything?
Uh-huh. Can we let that'll be on mic drop for now, but let's just let that hang a little bit.
Okay.
Oh, you want to know what else he does? During this period, while he's the co-chair of Blackstone and the chairman of the Council of Foreign Relations, from 2000 to 2004, he's the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, which is Blackstone's regulator, because Blackstone's based in Manhattan. Can I let that hang there for a little bit?
Holy crap.
Mm-hmm.
And again, these are the people that you never hear name mentioned.
Yep. I mean, I was in the industry, so I knew the name. I knew who the chair of the Federal Reserve Board of New York was. I knew who the founders of Blackstone were, but I didn't know he was CFR 25 years ago. All right. So he has always been a fiscal hawk that opposed deficits. So he's kind of got some good policies from time to time. He actually opposed George W. Bush's spending because it raised the deficit. Go back to 94, Clinton had named him a member of a bipartisan commission on entitlement and tax reform. So here's a guy who's getting all the benefits from being taxed as a REIT at a lower rate than the other corporations, and Clinton's got him on the bipartisan commission on entitlement and tax reform. So you wonder why the taxes didn't get reformed. Then he later on, there's something called the Institute for International Economics, the IIE. It would recently be renamed the Peterson Institute for International Economics because Peterson was a big contributor there. Have you ever heard of the Peterson Institute for International Economics?
I have.
You have?
I have.
Yeah, good. Okay, good. I thought you might be. It's considered one of the top 20 think tanks in the world. So it's a big deal. It's founded in 91. It's had some people on their boards, on the board of directors, like Alan Greenspan, the former chairman of the Federal Reserve. Also had Robert Rubin, former U.S. Secretary of the Treasury. So it's pretty influential.
Well, Robert Rubin, who co-chaired the CFR, also sat on Peter G. Peterson's foundation.
So we're going to get to that. It's my next paragraph.
Okay. All right.
Good job.
Okay.
The best thing about the Peterson Institute for International Economics is the major donor was none other than the Ford Foundation.
And let me just explain to people from a Gladio perspective what these economic institutes do. I mentioned earlier about the Chicago boys out of Chicago. They're the people that go in after a coup leading up to the coup. These are the people that are on the ground telling us how destabilized these people's economies are. They write all of these papers that basically say everything that the targeted country is doing is communist. And they help with because you guys remember, political warfare, economic warfare, and military warfare. Those are the three elements. And these economic institutes are the instigators of the economic war against the targeted country. They produce papers, they produce activists, they are critical to Operation Gladio and destabilization efforts.
Very good. All right, so and Ford Foundation, of course, for those who remember, Ford family's been knee deep in all kinds of shenanigans around the globe, including, financing the Nazis, and the Bolsheviks, and sending. Yeah, we've also seen them throughout our secret societies, the Ford family.
Well, the Ford Foundation funds many of the destabilization efforts. And I'm not saying that they're a funder of, but I'm going to use this one as an example. The Albert Einstein Institute, which brags about being the jackboots that they deploy forward in the lead up to the paramilitary once they need to destabilize the country when the economic and political warfare didn't work. Ford is one of the major funders through their foundation of these efforts to get the coup orchestrated, and then they benefit from it financially after it's done.
Vulture capitalism.
Yeah.
Far worse than that. Like I said, Peterson's always said his big issue is fiscal sustainability, which is something I agree with. He funds something that's out there today called the Fiscal Times, which supposedly is pushing fiscal sustainability. However, their authors all come from the Washington Post and the New York Times. So I'm not sure his version of fiscal sustainability is the same as mine.
Yeah.
He actually opposed Trump's 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act because it cut corporate taxes by raising debt. And that's a reasonable take. The last thing about Peter Peterson is the Peter Peterson Foundation, which, of course, under the guise of charity. You basically do all kinds of shenanigans. Peter Peterson founds his own foundation in 2008. Remember, he had advised the Rockefellers way back when?
Yeah.
He committed $1 billion of his own money to found it. To run it, he gets one David Walker, who was at the time the head of the United States Government Accountability Office, GAO. So the connection I'm trying to make is the doorway between the public sector and the private sector is non-existent. I mean, there is no barrier. These guys go back and forth, and they know everybody inside government. How are you going to regulate someone with this kind of access?
You don't.
What I love is the advisory board. There's some pretty interesting names. As the colonel pointed out, Bob Rubin, who's the co-chair of the Council of Foreign Relations, former U.S. Secretary Treasurer, he's on the advisory board. You've also got Bill Bradley, former senator, former All-American basketball player from Princeton, also a Rhodes Scholar. He's on the advisory board. Got Sheryl Sandberg from Facebook. And why not throw in a George Shultz from the Hoover Institute to be on your foundation? Ladies and gentlemen, that is Mr. Peter Peterson. He would pass away in 2018 at the age of 91.
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Let's get back to Schwarzman, our bonesman. So you know all about Blackstone. So what else has he done? In 2011, he's put on the International Advisory Board of the Russian Direct Investment Fund.
Oh, you're kidding me.
No, that's Russia's sovereign wealth fund. Now, it's not as big as some other sovereign wealth funds, but it's well over $10 billion and over $40 billion in foreign direct investments. And Schwarzman's one of the advisors.
But let me just suggest to you, well, go ahead. I'm going to hold that. Go ahead.
Yeah, we're getting into, I guess we'll shift to geopolitical stuff now, because this Russian direct, the RDIF, Russia Direct Investment Fund, they do partnerships with other countries. And Schwarzman's advising on this. So there's something called the Russian-Chinese Investment Corporation, the Russia-Japan Investment Fund, the Russian-Italian Investment Platform, and the Automatic Co-Investment Mechanism with Kuwait. In 2022, when the Ukraine war broke out, the RDIF was sanctioned along with all of their directors. You know who wasn't sanctioned? Schwarzman.
So, yeah, he's acting as a conduit of information back to, because they've been wanting to take over Russia for a very long time. And what better way to do that than to have someone like him involved in all of these deals with their sovereign wealth? Because you really can't start here and understand the whole scope of, you have to go back and look at what these same people, by the way, tried to do to Russia in the aftermath of the fall of the Soviet Union, when they sent in all of their goons to buy up all of their, because again, destabilization, all of these people rush in and they try to buy up all of the businesses and resources. And that's what the Hermitage Fund, funded by Safra, was doing in Russia when the guy that was helping them do it got killed, because they figured out what they were doing. And we end up with the Magnitsky Act, because everything that the US government and the CIA was trying to do was, we were told lies about what was actually going down in there. It was a vulture run on a dead carcass. And they got caught doing it by Putin. And he killed the Russian that was selling out Russians. And that got portrayed to the American public as Browder is the one that was working on behalf of the Hermitage Fund. He got caught, and he came home and lied about it, and basically accused the Russians as killing that guy because he just wanted a free market. That's not what was happening at all.
Yeah,
And
I was following that story in real time, and
yeah.
it was infuriating.
So you have to understand that they weren't able to do it the normal way because they got caught doing it. And so, what better way to have someone like this guy sit on this advisement board? So, what would be interesting, and way too timely to do it, but what would be interesting is to find out as they're working these deals with these other countries, as you just articulated, how many of those did very well? Because don't you know that every one of those things that the Russians were investing in, this same group of people back here is going to try to destabilize? That's
Yeah, a
all I
lot of
got.
those a lot of investments go into infrastructure projects too. So,
Yeah.
I forgot to give you a thought. Going back to Larry Fink and BlackRock, I wanted to point out the hypocrisy that the guy who basically started the collateralized debt problem took another property bankrupt that cost California public retirement funds $500 million. That's the guy our government went to for help.
Yeah.
That's I wanted to emphasize that before we go on. All right, what else about Schwarzman? There's more. He's politically active. He's a Republican who favors, and this is his own words, lower taxes, lower government spending, and reproductive rights. He's kind of a bit of a rhino.
Yeah.
He raised $100,000 for George W. Bush. He compared Obama's plan to raise the tax rate on carried interest to Hitler's invasion of Poland. He'd later have to apologize for that remark, but this whole carried interest loophole, this is how Blackstone gets their better tax rate. It's the carried interest. That's one of the two ways they do that. But on their private equity funds, that's carried interest. That's how these guys avoid taxes. When Obama was going after that, oh yeah, he got loud. And literally in 2012, Obama turns around and asks Schwarzman for assistance in brokering a budget with the Republicans to avoid the fiscal cliff. He would go on, and these guys play both sides of the street. They have to. He would endorse and fundraise for Romney in 2012. He declined to support anyone for the Republicans on the Republican side in 2016, but he had previously donated to Rubio, and he did say positive things about Hillary Clinton. In 2016, he helps put together Donald Trump's Strategic and Policy Forum. This is where I've got the question mark. When I asked you earlier, does it bother you that guys like this have Trump's ear?
So can I go back just a second? How many of those infrastructure investments with Russian sovereign wealth was done with the EU countries? And then how many of them were frozen when the Russia was sanctioned throughout the period of time for every little thing that they find wrong with Russia? Was that a way to freeze up their assets?
Maybe. You might want to look at the Russian-Italian investment platform to see if anything happened there.
Okay.
That would be the one from the EU.
Well, they did one with France too.
I didn't list that one from France for some reason.
Yeah. I was just looking at who they did it. Japan, all of the people. Yeah, there's one with France. All of the people, Saudi, that the U.S. has control over or leverage with. Wonder if there was some kind of a motivation behind that. But anyway, okay, keep going.
All right. So 2016, he puts together Donald Trump's Strategic and Policy Forum. And the corporate leaders that sit on this board are JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon and Disney's Bob Iger, General Electric's Jack Welch, and Schwarzman himself. They're putting together a strategic and policy forum helping Trump on economic. These are not the people I want. Trump taking economic advice.
No, but if they tell him what they want him to do, That doesn't mean he has to do it. It just means he needs to know what their agenda is.
Okay. Well, the reason Schwarzman picked him is that they're both, he's a New York businessman. He's been friends with Trump forever. And he still to this day provides Trump outside counsel on other matters. Let's wrap up Schwarzman. His net worth is approximately $35 billion. 2007, Time magazine called him one of the 100 most influential people in the world, you think? But he's been very philanthropic. In 2015, he gives $150 million to Yale for a campus center, alma mater. In 2018, he gives $350 million to MIT for the Schwarzman College of Computing. This guy likes his name on buildings.
He also likes to donate where Jeffrey Epstein was setting up shop too, just as an observation.
Interesting. He gave $150 million to Oxford University, which is where we get the Rhodes Scholars for the Schwarzman Center for the Humanities.
Yep.
In 2024, he's made an honorary Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire.
Yeah, that's a death kiss right there.
He lives in a duplex on Park Avenue that was previously owned by John D. Rockefeller Jr. And the final thing about him is something that he launched in 2013. He launches something called the Schwarzman Scholars. Have you heard of it?
No.
Okay. This is a one-year master's degree leadership program based at Tsinghua University in Beijing.
That's very interesting.
Oh, yeah. It happens to be Xi Jinping's alma mater, and that university.
Oh, gosh, that's hilarious.
And it's got very close ties to the CCP, as you might imagine.
Oh, yeah. Let's create all of our own enemies.
Yeah. So it's modeled after the Rhodes Scholarships and the classical Chinese academies. What they do is they take 100 to 200 scholars per year. The acceptance rate, and this just started in 2013, the acceptance rate is already comparable to the Rhodes and Marshall scholarships, meaning 1,000 people apply, then only like 40 get in. And it's got one of the lowest acceptance rates, so it's very much in demand with these type of academics. It was founded, allegedly, to reduce friction between the American and Chinese economies as China was rising in 2010s early. Schwarzman's approached by the president of Tsinghua University. Said, "We want you to do this." And here's what Schwarzman says: "If we do this, what I really want to do is construct a this is a quote, is construct a program that has the same prestige as the Rhodes Scholarship, because those are the students that I'm aiming for." Schwarzman gives about $100 million and raised another $200 million from other donors. As of 2025, about another $575 million has been raised. They built their curriculum on 3 pillars. They learned 3 things: leadership, global affairs, and China. There's Schwarzman, tied to the hip to our U.S. financial system and government. Okay? And he's going to China and doing this.
CFR.
The students are about 40% from the U.S., 20% from China, and about 40% from the rest of the world. Oh, do they have a fun advisory board? Number 1, Tony Blair, former United Kingdom Prime Minister. Brian Mulroney, former Canadian Prime Minister. Kevin Rudd, former Australian Prime Minister. Hank Paulson, former Secretary of the Treasury of the United States and Goldman Sachs CEO. Of course, you got to have John Thornton from the Brookings Institute again. How about Condoleezza Rice, former Secretary of State? Richard Haas, the President of the Council of Foreign Relations. Yo-Yo Ma, the cellist. Nicolas Sarkozy, president of France. Bob Rubin, Secretary of Treasury and the co-chair of the CFR. I think it's a gal. Yinyo Li, senior advisor for the Gates Foundation's China program. And of course, Henry Kissinger himself.
So it's just another globalist production incubator.
100%. All right. This last little bit, I think, is damning.
Like nothing else has been, but go ahead.
This Schwarzman Scholarship Program has very close ties they've maintained to what's called the UFWD. This is the United Front Work Department. This is a CCP, very closely tied, pretty much their propaganda arm, but also part of their espionage, foreign intelligence. The United Front was the spearhead of the Cultural Revolution. This is how they got all their academics. They killed them all. These are the people that sniffed out anybody who did not think like the party wanted them to. This is the United Front that is working closely, hand in hand, with the Schwarzman scholars. Let's talk about what does the United Front work do? Let me just read this quote. It gathers intelligence on, manages relations with, and attempts to gain influence over elite individuals and organizations inside and outside mainland China. How is that not espionage?
Well, it is.
And here's Schwarzman working hand in hand with him.
But I think that goes to our premise of this global world order. And there are these organizations that no one has ever heard of operating. So again, you just have to step back and ask a very simple question. Would the United States, if China was the enemy that it's portrayed as being, allow students to attend this university? Or would it have been put on a sanctions list in order for no one to participate in? You cannot make both arguments. If China is Hitler or the Bolsheviks, or name any other, Stalin, whatever, if that's what they are, then how is it that the United States is in bed with them? And they do it through these organizations like this. You can't make both arguments. You can't put all of your manufacturing in China and then tell me they're our worst enemy. You just can't. It makes no sense.
Unless they're in on the whole Great Reset globalist game, which is entirely possible. Because of the people that open up China are the same ones who gave us this new world order. We're talking Rockefeller, we're talking Kissinger, we're talking Bush. And if those ties still hold, and it's interesting to me that Trump just recently canceled all these student visas, because that's going to put a real dent on the United Front. But let me just read off a list of some of the outrages or people that have written about what the United Front has done.
But are they going to cancel the visas of the people that are going over on these types of exchanges? Because if they don't, then it's basically disingenuous. Because we're importing the people back that are the global that have been trained by China and Schwarzman.
Well, they're doing this all over the world. Okay, so 2018, Australia documented the activities and passed new laws targeting activities like political donations to stop the United Front. In 2021, Canadian Security Intelligence Service warned of the UFWD efforts to infiltrate Chinese Canadian communities. In 2018, the Hoover Institute in the U.S. warned of cultivation of U.S. academics, the Confucius Institutes. They've been criticized for monitoring and intimidating Chinese diaspora communities to enforce loyalty to the CCP. They suppress free speech and dissent abroad. You can't go abroad as a Chinese citizen and speak against the CCP. That's what these guys are doing. They are the loyalty police. In 2022, Amnesty International reports they harassed Uyghur and Tibetan activists in both the EU and the US. And in 2019 and 20, the Hong Kong protests mobilized counter demonstrations in Australia and Canada, according to The Guardian. These are the same people. We've read that we have a Chinese police department in New York. That's these guys. That is the front. And they are 100% obviously pushing the CCP's message, which we're going to agree that's definitely not a pro-US message. And that's how they're doing this. And and they're in bed with the head of the largest real estate manager in the world, who happens to help start the largest asset manager in the world.
That's just crazy.
Yeah. You mentioned something about, would our media be reporting on this? Didn't we see tons of Chinese money going into the major media companies? That's why they never say anything negative about the CCP.
That's why it makes me feel like this is a coordinated thing.
Yeah, it could be. China absolutely understands the globalist game. That's why they were brought into the World Trade Organization. That's why they still get treated like a developing nation, despite having the second biggest economy in the world. That's why all of these climate hypocrites go after the U.S. and Europe, tell them to stop, pumping carbon, never say a word to China and India.
But is it because we are building our next boogeyman?
I don't know. When you say we, you're talking about I think they're on to the Great Reset, the globalization game. It's that versus nationalism. And do they need a boogeyman for that, or are they ready to do the reset?
So our country to manipulate us in Europe needs a boogeyman to keep the defense budget going, to keep the CIA budget going. We have to have a boogeyman. And we talked before we started. There's company after company after company. The one that I really looked into was the company called Loral, Loral, that was basically caught selling technology to China. And they're one of many. We have used cutouts to get China technology in order to build them up over the last several decades, technology-wise, in order to be a near competitor. They would have never been anywhere near where they are today without U.S. technology. You remember the big scandal of Clinton with the space program. We based them, basically, Loral sold them missile guidance technology they would have not had. So, and I'm not saying they wouldn't have eventually got it, but they're looking, again, from a global perspective. When the Soviet Union fell, that boogeyman went away, although they've tried to revive it somewhat with Russia, unsuccessfully for the most part. But they moved on to radical Islamic terror, and they created that. And all the while, with the overtures in the 70s to China, they began rising China up. And now here we sit with another boogeyman that you see every day people writing about, but they would not have been where they are today without all of our jobs moving over to China, without Apple, without Schwarzman, without all of this effort to push into China, all of these things. And I just see this as a pattern that these globalists, in order to make us live in fear and to steal our wealth, they have to have a boogeyman. China is just one of those.
And the climate hoax is one of them too.
Yes.
We didn't see a whole lot of rhetoric against China coming out of the Biden administration at all.
No,
it was very quiet, and that's obviously Hunter Biden's activities in China probably are the reason for that. He's compromised, but
But we made them rich with all of the COVID shit and ordering all the PPP stuff from them.
Yeah, those would be the globalists. I think all roads lead to the Rockefellers on this one. Well, those are my bonesmen for today.
All right. Well, another great show. And a lot of people, again, that's what I love about the series is these are the people that lurk in the background that no one talks about. And you hear it here. And it gives you a completely different perspective of the stories that you're being told in the mainstream media.
And it gives you you really understand how the world really works, and it's not the way they tell us.
Correct.
We are far from a democracy. We are far from a republic. This is an aristocracy ruled by very select, well, it's actually quite a few people in that little circle of friends, but they are a level above everyone else. And they, under the guise of telling us we're a democracy or republic, pretend that we actually are free. And they have got to be exposed and stopped.
I agree. So please, once you guys finish watching this, share this so more people understand what's going on. If you guys aren't, please go follow War Hamster and go to his Rumble channel. He has excellent stuff. He does shows all the time, constitutional shows, and he's obviously a wealth of information, which is why I love doing shows with him. And then tomorrow at 11, whose channel is that going to be on?
Well, I was going to host it, but if you want to do it live, why don't you host it if we're going to do it live? I'm not set up for live yet.
Okay, so come back here, and War Hamster, myself, and Ghost of Base Patrick Henry are all going to do a sit rep. And the countries we're covering again, War Hamster?
Well, there's 3 pretty big hotspots going on right now. Obviously, Ukraine, the Iran-Israel situation, and we also want to talk about the fireworks going on over in India, Pakistan, and what led up to that. Yeah. And we've been wanting to do the India-Pakistan for a couple of months. I just haven't really. It's my fault. I've not had time to do it.
He's a slacker.
Yeah. Well,
oh, and hey, if you do, busy.
If you do check out my channel, I did a show 2 days ago. It was just a grassroots spotlight with a dear friend of mine, former political ally. I used to protest with a wonderful woman named Audra Morgan. She's been on Fox News for getting thrown out of so many city council meetings, just berating these people and fighting COVID lockdowns. But she's an investigative reporter, citizen journalist, does Eye of the Storm. She's been down in the San Diego border, and she's been doing firsthand eyewitness reporting on the child trafficking. And we did a 1-hour video this week, and oh my God, it will break your heart when you hear her passionate. Of all the shows I've ever done, it's the least I've ever spoken. She just started going, and I was just sitting back and saying, wow. So she's something, you want to check out the Audra Morgan show. She's great.
Awesome. Definitely go check that out. And that's what we got. Oh, and just because we have the Operation Gladio, I just want to do a shout out. Last night on Apple Warriors show, he played the clip of Joe Rogan interviewing AJ Gentile of the Who's File, and his mentioning Operation Gladio on the air for the second time on a major multi-million follower podcast. So shout out to all you guys who took Alpha Warriors call to action and reposted that. I really appreciate it. Okay, so that's it for today's show. We'll be back next Thursday at noon for another segment of Operation Gladio meets Secret Societies with War Hamster Brady. Thank you for being here.
Cheers, everyone.